Hey Trails Collective, Ian here with a review of 2020's Salomon Wildcross. The history for me is I've yet to find really a Salomon model that I've really loved. Finding some of their models too firm and slappy or too rigid and narrow in both the midfoot and the toe box. Or in the case of their road line, the Predict 1 of I think early 2019, which had one of the I think best fits right out of the box of any shoe I've ever worn, but just felt like a total unresponsive marshmallow with running in it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what the Predict 2 is like when it debuts, pushed back here in 2021. And this is tough because I really appreciated what Salomon has really brought to the table in terms of technology, in terms of support of the sport, athletes, commitment to U.S. trail running and community in the U.S. and some of my events, and also just creating really cool products. So the intent and the specs that I found on the Wildcross at first view, I was really stoked about and would hope would change that. So let's find out if that proved true. So I put in a bit over 100 miles into my pair of Wildcrosses here. And this, I think, coated and in mud and grit and goodness, is really what I think speaks to, I think, what the Wildcross is really after. I've really tried to put it through its paces over really varied terrains, running it in a 24-hour effort up in the Adirondacks, supporting Sarah Kies as she went after the FKT for the Adirondack 46s. Got to put it over rocks with greater friction, several stream crossings, really unpredictable terrain, wet logs, and it performed really well. In my backyard here in Ithaca, I've used it on a little bit less technical trails, from stream crossings to wet logs to hard pack to single track to rocks. I've really tried to, and actually literally even swimming with the shoe on stream crossings and just dips in the middle of just hot runs in impromptu fashion. So let's take you through a bit about how that went and the specs of the shoe. So weighing in at 10.6 ounces for the men's size 9, 9.2 ounces for the women's size 7. Both were 0.4 ounces heavier than the listed specs or publicized specs of the shoe, and with stack heights of 29.5 millimeters in the heel and 21.5 in the forefoot for a drop of 8 millimeters. One of the also most critical, I think, things for me in terms of the overall design of the shoe is really the shape or the last. So something for me historically was just how narrow some of the Salomon models are in the midfoot, in that midfoot gauge. It may hold a foot to a certain extent, but for me it really gouges into my arch. And the toe box was such a point. I mean, that's, in my opinion, pretty ridiculous shape here, how narrow that is, how relatively high in the heel it is, and how pointed that is. You might as well be wearing a high heel. So for Salomon to really, I think, demonstrate their commitment to the U.S. market, understanding of foot types, really what the U.S. market is about as opposed to the European market, widening that midfoot gauge, widening the toe box just a bit, really good moves. May lose a little bit of really hardcore Salomon customers who really love maybe that traditional Speedcross fit, but I think that they're going to pick up a lot more customers than they're going to lose. So I'll run you through some of the design materials, use some comparisons, and most importantly, whether I think they all work individually as well as putting them all together into a single functional unit. So unlike the design of our economy and politics at the moment, I am going to take it from the bottom or ground up, so to speak. The outsole. Salomon is using Contra Grip TA in this model. The blend, I think, is really versatile. Has a really great sticky design over multiple terrains. Stickier than road-oriented companies such as Brooks, even where they're using their trail tack. I just find that companies coming at it from a trail background and orientation just tend to work better, and I think that for sure holds in the Contra Grip. It's probably not quite as sticky as what's used with a butyl rubber in that VJ uses in their shoes, but somewhat of a trade-off. Whereas I wore through one of the lugs in the VJ Max, in this case, all the way through to puncturing to the midsole in less than 100 miles, so far the Wildcross doesn't have that much notable abrasion throughout the shoe. So maybe a little bit of a trade-off in durability there versus the butyl rubber. Also probably not quite as sticky or tacky as what Innovate's using with the graphene. Probably not as durable as the graphene either, but I think feels a bit maybe softer underfoot, but pretty versatile and works pretty well. 6mm lugs of the shoe. In this case, that 6mm are fairly aggressive, and the lug design and choice I think really speaks to also what the shoe is really designed for, and that is to be really aggressive in varied movements on the trail. The pattern themselves, or the shape themselves, is fairly asymmetric, and that allows the shoe to corner and grip and bank and move just like it's designed to do. Sends the lugs similar to what the Speedcross uses all the way through to the toe, as well as the heel for a really good rollover angle. And the spacing between the lugs here really allows it to not even really just shed the mud, but it doesn't even hang on to it. So whereas the shoe from a run yesterday is totally coated and caked in this mud, there's just nothing on the outsole. And I really think that that speaks to the difference, or the effectiveness rather. And the difference between the two is something like the Speedcross, which has a traditional chevron lug pattern, I think really is built to sync with a shoe that's more akin or really designed for a more linear motion, as opposed to the Wildcross really being designed to tackle varied terrains and movements. And so it handles mud, varied terrain really well, and all but the stickiest of muds, it slides right off of it. So all but conditions maybe like this. That's what the Wildcross is designed for right there. That's fantastic. All right, the contra grip going up is layered into an Energy Cell Plus EVA midsole, similar to what's used in some of the other models, such as the Speedcross. But whereas the Speedcross is really, at least to my feel, built like a tank with not that much or as much torsion to the shoe, the Wildcross has more flex, and that what I think that really allows is for the perception and actual felt benefit of that Energy Cell Plus. It's in their midsole lineup. It's designed to be a midsole foam that has superior bounce and rebound to it, and when you're pairing it with a shoe that's just fairly rigid, I don't think you really get the full effect of that. But in the Wildcross, I think it works really well. The midsole shaping also comes up in wings on either side of the shoe. The foot sits down and the heel down into the midsole, wraps up on the outside, and I think this works really effective in allowing for a certain amount of dynamic stability in the shoe. So that paired with a fairly traditional heel cup in the upper and the wings here, which I'll talk about in a second, really allows the shoe to have a pretty superior level of dynamic stability for varied terrains and movements. Also what's a perceived difference, actually a real difference, is even though the stack height is relatively similar to some of the other models such as the Speedcross, the feel in terms of the ground, or the ground feel, I think is far superior. It's just more malleable, and it really works well. The shoe doesn't inlay a rock plate. I was having a conversation with one of my reps just this past week with a company who's releasing a pretty cool looking shoe or variation on a current model in 2021. In the shoe, it has a pretty significant amount of midsole depth. In my opinion, for sure doesn't need a rock guard or a rock plate. The answer in that question or in that conversation was that they put it in there because there are certain, I think, shoe resellers, bigger stores, maybe even smaller specialty stores that in my opinion just don't know better, and customers that really think that a functional and good trail shoe really needs to have a rock plate. I've lived in all over, growing up on the Beast Coast, running trails in Pennsylvania, moved and spent time living in Hawaii, New Mexico, California, Washington for a bit, and then lived on the border of the Cascades in Central Oregon for maybe 4 or 5 years. I've run terrain all over, and I really think that in most cases, rock plates are really unnecessary and overblown. So I'm thankful that Salomon hasn't buckled into needing or putting them in all shoes, and I don't think the Wildcross has needed it. I for sure have looked out for, or took it in the lineup of putting it through its paces of finding sharp rocks or pointed branches that are protruding from stumps. And what I think the Energy Cell Plus and depth of midsole allowed the shoe to do was absorb, if not buckle to a certain extent, underneath the protrusions. But I didn't really feel those jabs. I felt them, but I didn't really feel it jabbing into my foot per se. And so I'm thankful that it doesn't add the unnecessary rigidity to the forefoot that plates sometimes offer. Let's go into the upper. One of the most noticeable pieces in the model is the external SensiFit, which is something that Salomon has used in several models along the way. So if you look fairly closely in this Sense 4 Pro, you can see the bands that are woven into the upper. Similar with the Sense Ride, a little bit different configuration, but worked in there, and external on this side. So SensiFit for sure not new to Salomon, but what they're using here is they integrated it as an external shroud or wings, and they're terming it DreamTex. So DreamTex, my first reaction is that's a completely ridiculous term. But the function beyond just the name, I think is worked. So what it does is connects into the last of the shoe. A piece or a wing comes up on either side, has a gusset underneath between the vamp and the upper, and it's connected on the top with their quick lace system. Underneath that, both of those wings, in the upper is a center stretch mesh panel, which further just hugs or brings that vamp together. And what that allows is to also have a fairly traditional tongue in the mix. One of the things that I found in some of the prior Salomon models that had a gusseted tongue but didn't have this shroud is that some of the debris would get down in the gussets of the tongue and it would just get lodged there. In the case of the wings and the DreamTex, there's still a gap there, and I was wondering whether any debris would get in there. But once your foot pushes it out, and because it's got an opening on both sides, I haven't had the experience of any material getting lodged in there. What the two wings coming together or pulled together in the center also allows is the shoe to, again, have a good amount of dynamic stability to it. So you may push one way or the other, but your foot really retains its center over the shoe. There are certain other models that I've tested or wear tested this year in the Brooks Catamount. Brooks Catamount was using some degree of a system with a lamination into the upper, but what I found was that any unstable or off-camber terrain, I'd really just pitch out over the shoe. It just didn't really keep my foot there. And so as I'll play a clip here of in the Wildcross running on, it was roughly a 40 to 45 degree pitch slope, and they were wonderful. They were still soft, flexible, malleable enough where my ankle was allowed to move in the shoe. Something that was more rigid, I would imagine something like that Speedcross. It may have been fairly stable on the slope, but it would have felt much less malleable and it would have felt more like a cinder block. The Wildcross and the wings allowed some adaptation to the slope, but really kept me feeling really stable over the shoe. So that was, I think it works really well. The quick lace system into this, I've been historically take it or leave it with the quick laces. I think they've probably turned more people off in the general population than they've really turned on. But they, I think, do their job in terms of they are easy. They don't come loose during the run. They don't take on water, mud, and they're fairly durable. Something prior to 2020 in some of the earlier models. I've had several teammates that had their quick lace systems in just the past, I think 2 years probably, snap mid-race. And what Salomon was using prior was they had a little bit tighter eyelets here, and they put plastic tubes into those eyelets, maybe for durability or thinking that the lace would be smooth through there. But I think what ended up happening was that some of the debris or dirt got lodged in those eyelets, and the increased friction in there caused more fraying and eventually snapping of the quick laces. So that's changed, that's gone away this year in the models. They don't have those tubes in there anymore. And also being slightly wider eyelets should allow, if somebody doesn't want the quick lace, to snap that out and put in a regular lace. Another change in several of the models this year was the quick lace inserting into the envelope where this tucks into on the top of the tongue. In some prior models, that tucked in under the tongue, and I always felt that that was a little awkward to manage. So this one, I think dropping in from the top makes it easier to cinch and also to tuck into that tongue. There are some reviewers or feedback where that maybe had a little bit more of a tendency to pop out the top. But in my opening 100, 125 miles into the shoe, I haven't really experienced that. So not really an issue for me. And then also, I guess on the upper, what also is the material. The materials is pretty hydrophobic in several regards here. So just the material of itself, as I mentioned, I've taken this thing literally swimming on several occasions, and it really didn't feel that much of a drag on my feet. It was actually kind of cool. And as I exited the water, it seemed to just not hang on to it. It was kind of gone immediately, which is not the case in some of the other models that I've been wearing or testing. In addition, the insole or the sock liner, which in their line I think is pegged as not one of their nicer sock liners. It's just a molded ortholite. It has more of a closed cell, I guess, composition to it, and that's versus the insole in the Sense 4 Pro, and you may or may not be able to see it, which is a little bit more open cell ortholite, or what's used in the Speedcross here, also a more noticeable foam open cell ortholite. What the companies get out of these is they feel really good out of the box. You first put your foot into the shoe, it adds a bit of cushion, it's pretty resilient, it feels really good. But for those of you who haven't really paid too much attention or tried to figure out maybe where that water retention was coming from, that ortholite insole in fairly open cell fashion acts as a sponge, and it really takes in all the water that enters the shoe, and it really hangs on to it. Some of the compression, it will squeeze it out just like a sponge, but it'll hold it for hours. And so even though this may be pegged as not one of their nicer insoles or sock liners, I think that's a good thing, because I think functionally actually works better when the shoe gets wet. So good thing there. And then further in the upper, they also wrap it with a rubberized lamination for abrasion resistance. And I think that this is pretty important because the shoe is going to give you probably the tendency to want to probably stop and, well, let me just show you. Salomon Wildcross, because you too can stop, pick up logs, and throw them into the woods. The Salomon Wildcross. Built to play. To fulfill all of your lunger or logging wanting tendencies, toe cap is there, has you for abrasion or toe protection in case that log falls on your foot. So, all in all, 125 miles in, I think my expectations, my hopeful expectations have been met. I've been really excited about the shoe. It's felt great under my foot. It's really versatile, and I'll plan on keeping it on my foot in the rotation as long as Salomon keeps it on the line and doesn't mess it up in some way. I think this really typifies Salomon's slogan of time to play, and it'll make you, I think, even want to do this. The Salomon Wildcross, built for doing round-offs down a hill. That's right. So all of you out there, the lateral stability, the 6mm lugs, the just energy that this shoe is going to give you, no doubt most of your descents going forward, you're probably going to want to do some round offs, maybe a little bit cleaner than mine, but the shoe is definitely designed for it. Instead of probably the Salomon Wildcross, they probably should have really renamed this nimble gem the Salomon Liger.
What are you drawing?
A liger.
What's a liger?
It's pretty much my favorite animal. It's like a lion and a tiger mixed. Bred for its skills and magic.
So kudos to you, Salomon, for this whole package. Again, I've loved it. For all of you out there who you think it might work for you, definitely stop in your local run specialty shop. See if they've got it. If they don't have it, and if they've got Salomon, see if they can order it for you. And support us here at the Trails Collective. Hop online, check out our trail shop. We'll try to keep it in stock as much as we can, men's and women's. Reach out if you've got any questions. Thanks for tuning into this gear review. We'll catch you on the next loop. See ya. Oh, hey. You found me just hanging out. Sitting in this piece of deck furniture, dangling from these here ropes, suspended from this here tree that I found hanging in these here woods. Well, thought it'd be a good time to weigh in and just let you know that these Salomon Wildcrosses, they feel fantastic. And well, reckon that's all I got to say about these.